What's up guys, Mitch from Shock Therapy here, and today we're going to be showing you how to install the spring kit for a Polaris XP900. This spring kit is going to do multiple things for you. Not only is it going to increase the ride height itself, it's also going to promote the plushness in the car, as well as eliminate the bucking that is prone in the vehicle itself. Another benefit of our spring kit is it's going to smooth out the ride quality of the car. It's also going to help with the bump stage side of things if you decide to hit something big. This install should take you no longer than 2 to 3 hours. Let's jump on in. I'm going to show you guys how to get it done. The first step is to jack up the front of the car until the wheels are off the ground. Use jack stands for safety. Next, remove the hardware holding the shocks to the vehicle. Start with the upper hardware first, finishing with the lower hardware. Remove one shock at a time, as they are side specific and you should not mix them up. Alright guys, so pro tip, once you get the shock out of the car, make sure to remove all of your spacers that come on the factory shock. This helps you when you go to put it in the vise and remove the spring to not lose the spacers. That's it. With the shock in the vise, compress the spring system and remove the factory spring perch. Save the spring perch, but discard the factory spring. Next, set the preload collar and crossover heights. Set the preload collar to 1 3/4 inches. This is measured with the tape measure butted up against the factory bridge. Next, disassemble the crossover and prepare to install it onto the shock. Install the crossover ring on the shock body at 5 1/4 inches. This is also measured from the bridge of the shock. Make sure that the crossover ring is installed with the recessed groove in the crossover facing the direction of the shock shaft. Now, tighten all the hardware for the crossover. Install the silent crossover O-ring. If you installed the crossover ring correctly, it should sit in a recessed groove. Next, install the Shock Therapy dual rate spring kit. Starting with the upper spring first, make sure the part numbers on the spring are right side up. Since the shock is upside down in the vise, the logo will also be upside down at this point. Install the Shock Therapy spring divider. The long end of the spring divider will face towards the shock shaft. Next, install the lower spring with the logo in the correct direction. Compress the system and install the lower spring perch. Now you can reinsert the shock spacers and install the shock back on the UTV, starting with the upper hardware.
Yeah, that's good.
Next, install the lower hardware. Make sure that you leave all the hardware loose. Later on in the installation, you might find it easiest to adjust the ride height by taking the shock off the vehicle. Repeat these steps on the opposite side. With both shocks on the front of the UTV, you can remove the jack stands and lower the car back on the ground. Now, jack up the back of the vehicle until the tires are off the ground. Always use jack stands for safety. Start by removing one shock at a time. Upper hardware first and then the lower hardware. These shocks are side specific, so you do not want to mix them up. With the shock and the vise, compress the spring system and remove the factory spring perch. Then, remove the factory springs and spring divider. Save the spring divider and factory perch, but discard the factory springs. With the shock and the vise, set the preload collar and crossover ring locations. Preload in the rear should be set at 1 inch. This is measured from the flat spot on the bridge of the shock. Next, disassemble the crossover and prepare to install it on the shock. The crossover ring should be installed at 3 1/4 inches. Make sure it is installed with the recessed groove facing the shock shaft. Now, tighten all the hardware for the crossover. With the crossover ring installed, make sure to install the silent crossover O-ring. Next, install the upper spring and spring divider. The spring divider should be installed with the long end facing the shock shaft. Next, install the lower spring. Compress the system and install the lower spring perch and mudguard. You can now install the shock back on the UTV. Make sure that you start with the upper hardware first, ending with the lower hardware, keeping the hardware loose until later on in the installation. Repeat these steps on the opposite side. Something to mention to you guys, this is a tricky nut to get onto the bolt there. If you put the nut into an open end wrench and kind of fish it in there, you should be able to get it no problem. With both shocks on the rear of the vehicle, you can now remove the jack stands and lower the UTV back on the ground. With the car on the ground, you can now settle the suspension by driving the car back and forth. You cannot do this by simply jumping up and down on the back of the car. The last time you come to a stop, do so without using the brakes. With the driver remaining in the UTV, check the ride height in the front. This is measured from the ground up to the bottom of the frame at the lower control arm rear pivot point. This measurement should be 14 inches. If your ride height is correct, check the gap on the crossover ring. In the front, it should have an 1.5 inch gap between the bottom of the crossover and the spring divider. Next, check the rear ride height. This is measured from the ground to the bottom of the frame at the rear of the UTV. This should be 13.5 inches. The rear crossover gap should be 2 inches from the bottom of the crossover ring to the top of the spring divider. If your ride heights are not perfect to start with, as every UTV is different, you may have to adjust them up or down. We find it's easier to adjust the ride height by removing the shock from the vehicle, placing it back in the vise, and raising or lowering the preload collar accordingly. All preload adjustments are about a 2-to-1 ratio. So, if you need to raise or lower the front of the vehicle 1 inch, you're going to move the preload collar 1/2 inch. This ratio applies to the rear as well. Knowing this in advance, you should be able to adjust the preload one time and nail the ride height. Once you've made your preload adjustments, make sure you settle the suspension again by driving the UTV back and forth a few times. If your ride heights are perfect and your crossovers are set accordingly, it's now time to lock down all factory hardware and your installation is complete. We hope that this video helped you with the installation of your spring kit at home. As always, we recommend to check the ride height after the first 100 to 300 miles and adjust it accordingly. Another very important point is making sure that you always check the ride heights with the driver in the vehicle itself. We always recommend too that if you're adding or subtracting weight from the vehicle to recheck the ride heights as well and make sure that you match them to our recommended specs. Our springs are made in the USA. They are also warranted for life. This is the #1 thing that we always recommend as your first suspension upgrade. If you decide to do this kit and you're happy, but you want some more, you can always pair it with the RAS system for the ultimate ride quality out of the car. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell to be notified anytime that we post a new video. If you guys have any other questions regarding our spring kit or any other products that we have, feel free to give us a call at 623-217-4959. For any other replacement parts or anything available on the website, visit it at www.shocktherapist.com.
Saw that lens move. That was hot. Okay. I got that one.
Do you know Kenny?
Yeah.
You know Kenny?
Yeah.
Miss Kenny.
Ford Ranger.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
It's the 10 crack commandments. Why?
Huge ass brushing sessions, and then I'm wearing white right now, so it doesn't look that bad. You've seen me when I come and wearing like the black shock therapy, right? Yeah, I look like a carpet. We love you, Josh.
We love
Mwah.
you.
See ya.
Later, Ari. That guy floats on Earth. He's like Jesus, but like 10 times more magnificent.
Did you know that Ari sorts Legos?
Sorts Legos?
Yeah, in his spare time. Sorts them by color and size.
Like individual pieces?
Legos.
He doesn't build things, he just sorts them?
I mean,
Hey to Josh.
yep.
Okay.
Don't look at me while you do it though. Stop.
You can see that?
Yeah.
Why?
Why can I see that? Come on.
sorry, okay? Are you ready?
I've been ready. Cool.
Fake it till you make it, that's what they say. Oh boy. This is way more fun when I get to have fun, Josh.
I know, but you're the one who wanted to speed film it.
You're right.
So I'm going to be here to keep you on track.
Sorry, Dad.
I feel like I don't know what I'm talking about when I'm up here. It's crazy. Quality that is known to have an ability to be able to happen in the car. Hit something big.
You!